University of Cambridge revoking a visiting fellowship for psychologist Dr. Jordan Peterson.
The US was founded on identity politics. This is not some new concept that has come along in the last 20 years.
The United States wasn't founded on identity politics.
Yes, it was.
That's absolutely absurd proposition. The United States was founded on the same principles that, what would you say, that played their powerful role through the development of English democracy. And that was nested inside a Judeo-Christian view that fundamentally presumed that both men and women were made in the image of God and that all people had divine value. And it took a long time for that set of ideas to fully manifest itself in the political realm. But to consider that a manifestation of identity politics is, I can't imagine why you would possibly do that.
I don't consider that a manifestation of identity politics. I consider having a constitution that says only some people are citizens to be a manifestation of identity politics.
Well, what do you think changed it across time? And look, let's get our definitions straight here. You can't lump all occurrences of non-equal treatment into the category of identity politics. Identity politics is a very specific thing. It's really only existed since the 1970s. You can't go back into 1770 and say that the founders of the American Constitution were playing identity politics.
They were playing politics that was based on identity. That's my definition of identity politics.
That's not the definition of identity politics unless you play fast and loose with the definition. Identity politics is something that's... No one talked about identity politics 20 years ago or 30 years ago. It's a new term. You can't say that people's proclivity to identify with their group is identity politics. That's just tribalism. And that's like, who knows how old that is? 1,000,000 years old. 500,000 years old. And you're going to call tribalism identity politics? Well, that's not helpful. If you want to talk about tribalism, we could talk about tribalism. But identity politics is something that's nested inside a particular political view of the world. It's got a Marxist basis, and it manifests itself in postmodernism. So when Nietzsche announced the death of God, he did it sorrowfully, and then he tried to think about what we might be able to do about that, because it was going to lead us down two bad pathways, either towards nihilism and the belief, or what would you call the direct experience, that because God was dead, everything might be permitted, as Dostoevsky pointed out, or totalitarianism, which would arise as a rational substitute for the dogmas of religion. And he knew that both of those would be catastrophic occurrences. But at least, more profoundly, that the death of the idea of a universe ordered by something that's akin to the living and conscious and aware and intelligent. It's rough to replace that with pure random meaninglessness, and of course that's the pathway to nihilism. Anyways, Nietzsche thought we would have to create our own values to replace those that would fall because of the death of Christianity.
But having a coherent ideology does mean that it is predictable, because
you don't need an ideology.
It is one logical thing that flows from another, and all those pieces tessellate together. So what I find very interesting about your thinking, I find it quite slightly baffling, is that I don't really see how all the pieces fit together. You say that you're not, you believe in God, but that then doesn't, to me, tessellate very obviously with your insistence that we know actually it's just about pure science, and there's not a, because I can see...
What insistence that it's just about pure science?
Well,
I wrote Maps of Meaning. There's no insistence in that it's just about pure science.
Okay, but you make appeals to science. What I mean is,
different.
You make appeals to science all the time. You say, well, this is what the literature says. And the trouble with God is that ultimately you can't say this is what the literature says. There is no literature.
Which is why I don't say anything about the scientific status of God, apart from what can be experienced maybe under certain conditions of what would you call chemical-induced mysticism, which seems to be something that you can say something scientifically about. But I see that there's two different realms, right? There's a realm of values and a realm of facts. And in the realm of facts, science reigns supreme. But it doesn't in the realm of values. You have to look elsewhere. You can't make your own values. Like, you can aim, you can direct your life, you can cooperate in determining the values that you pursue. But you cooperate with forces in yourself that aren't you and can't be made you. Not in any straightforward way. And it's easy to understand this if you think about, for example, the fact that if you do something that you shouldn't do, or if you don't do something that you should do, that you'll lay awake in bed at night and torment yourself about it and worry about it and consider yourself an unworthy person, as if you believed in the idea of sin. It's a very strange thing that there's an ethic that calls to you from within that you can't control, that holds you responsible for your actions. They're hungry for a discussion of the relationship between responsibility and meaning. And we haven't had that discussion in our culture for 50 years. We've concentrated on rights and privileges and freedom and impulsive pleasure, and those are all useful in their place, but they're shallow, and that's not good. And then you work diligently to ensure that your actions are in keeping with that, and you allow yourself on that pursuit to be informed by the knowledge of your ignorance and the necessity for acting and speaking in truth. And a fair bit of that, I believe, is derived, I think it's fair to say that that's derived from an underlying Judeo-Christian ethic, and I make no bones about the fact that I think of those stories metaphysically or philosophically or psychologically as fundamental to the proper functioning of our society insofar as it can function properly. And so it's not happiness, it's meaning. I was very interested in your comments about Christ's atheism on the cross, that final moment of atheism. That's something I'd never thought about in that way.
Chesterton orthodoxy. A short book, excellent.
No, it's a very interesting thought, because it's an unbelievably merciful idea in some sense, that the burden of life is so unbearable. And you see in the Christian passion, of course, torture, unfair judgment by society, betrayal by friends, and then a low death. And so that's about as bad as it gets, right? Which is why it's an archetypal story, right? It's about as bad as it gets. And the story that you describe points out that it's so bad that even God himself might despair about the essential quality of being.
Yeah.
Right. So that is merciful in some sense, because it does say that there is something that's built into the fabric of existence that tests us so severely in our faith about being itself that even God himself falls prey to the temptation to doubt.
Okay, let's talk about transgender issues. That's fun. What do you think I think about transgender issues?
I suspect that you think that gender expression, gender identity are fundamentally social constructs, but I could be wrong.
No, I believe that there are definitely some biological differences between the sexes. We've observed them. I do believe that gender is a hugely powerful social structure that we've built on top of that it is largely, but not entirely, socially constructed. I think when you look back through the history, biological differences have consistently shrunk, like we were talking in the 18th.
They haven't in Scandinavia, they've magnified.
Okay, but we were talking in the 18th.
That's actually an important exception, because Scandinavia has gone farther than any other area, the Scandinavian countries, in establishing egalitarian social policy. And the differences in interest and career choice and personality between men and women have grown as a consequence, not shrunk, which is exactly the opposite of what the social construction is predicting.
But also just suggests that they're malleable, actually, rather than fixed.
Well, of course they're malleable. No one would ever suggest otherwise.
Right. So that's what I mean. So I think
they're not malleable in the direction that the social constructionists presume. As you flatten out the sociological landscape, you maximize the biological differences. No one saw that coming.
To believe that there is no evidence for gender identity in the way that it is used as an idea of a soul. I think that's the way that it's often used to me.
By who?
By transgender activists.
Yes, well,
they think about having a female soul, and that to me seems strange. I don't see how you can
something like biological determinism,
right?
Which is it's one of the things that's so perversely amusing about these sorts of arguments is that but I attribute it to the lack of demand for logical consistency as a consequence of postmodern thinking. You can believe one thing when it's convenient in one situation and another thing when it's convenient for another. So we're in the perverse position where if you're a man born in a woman's body, that's biologically determined. But if you're a woman born in a woman's body, that's socially constructed. It's like, okay, good luck with that theory.
Right. I don't believe you can be a man born in a woman's body or a woman born in a man's body. What I believe is that there are some people who feel alienation towards their bodies and they want to remove
Well,
body
everybody
parts.
feels that.
Right, but they feel it to such an extent that clinically the best treatment for them is to transition and live as if they were the other
Yeah,
sex.
well, I don't think that there's any evidence that that's clinically the best treatment. We certainly don't know enough to make that presupposition, and I think we're playing with fire assuming that that's the case.
Let's talk about free speech to finish on.
Yeah, he calls himself the professor against political correctness. We have a statement from Cambridge University, from their student union. It says it's a political act to associate the university with an academic's work through offers which legitimize figures such as Peterson. His work and views are not representative of the student body, and as such, we do not see his visit as a valuable contribution to the university, but one that works in opposition to the principles of the university. So do they ban anyone who is political, or just those they disagree with?
I think they ban just those who they disagree with. We have political figures visit the campus all the time, but when one of those figures is someone that they oppose, then they're willing to disinvite them.
What was your reaction to this? Because I know you're a big fan of his.
Yeah, I was very disappointed in the university. When I first discovered this, I was very excited that Jordan Peterson was going to be joining us on the campus, and so when they rescinded his invitation, I was very irritated. I thought this kind of deplatforming culture existed only in the US, but apparently exists elsewhere as well.